So you may not be able to see it, but it's still snowing outside. And it was supposed to be warm and sunny today. I also just found out that my Olympus 150 to 400 lens is not going to ship in January, like it was supposed to. Apparently it might ship in April, or maybe it won't. Sounds like they're only getting a couple of units in the first shipment, and sounds like I am no longer in the first shipment. So much for mispredictions. Anyway, today we're going to talk about the myth of several different companies building interchangeable lenses, camera bodies, and accessories that all conform to a single system. A single standard letting consumers mix and match the various partners' strengths to build the ultimate personalized kit. Yep, it's another Micro Four Thirds video, perhaps best subtitled, Why Panasonic Isn't the Savior for Olympus Users. Most camera systems have been a single brand, such as Canon with EOS and its EF and RF lenses. Sometimes there have been partnerships and joint productions, such as Hasselblad rebranding Sony E-mount cameras, or Fuji's early digital SLRs, which used Nikon's F-mount. In both cases, though, there was a clear system owner. Four Thirds, and then Micro Four Thirds, had promised something different. Now, I'm going to focus on Micro Four Thirds, but there are parallels warnings for the newer L system, which on its face promises ideas similar to those promised by Micro Four Thirds. Even though the system is strictly and legally speaking owned by Leica, with Four Thirds, Micro Four Thirds, and the L-mount Alliance, the marketing is all similar in that the Alliance members would focus on their strengths, and consumers would benefit by being able to choose the best options from within the system. You would be able to buy a body from Olympus, a lens from Sigma, a teleconverter from Panasonic. At least you could be forgiven for thinking you can mix and match it like that. The reality is that Micro Four Thirds never delivered on the idea of being able to mix and match freely, with certain trade-offs being more obvious than others, starting with the very limited support for teleconverters. Both Olympus and Panasonic made teleconverters, each only working with a small subset of its own lenses. So let's pick up from there. While the lenses are mechanically compatible with each other's bodies, not to mention DJI drones or Blackmagic video cameras, guarantee is essentially in there. When it comes down to it, it's not surprising that Olympus's lenses work best with Olympus's cameras and Panasonic lenses work best with Panasonic's cameras, even if it's not something that's obvious from the marketing material without diving into footnotes or referenced compatibility charts. I know, it's sad, isn't it? Early on, Olympus and Panasonic took different paths for stabilization, with Olympus utilizing in-body image stabilization while Panasonic relied on lens stabilization. While the GX7 brought us the first Panasonic camera with in-body stabilization, things started to get a bit interesting with the GX8 in 2015. With it, Panasonic introduced Dual I.S, where the Panasonic body would work with a stabilized Panasonic lens to offer even better image stabilization than either would alone. Olympus introduced its first stabilized Micro Four Thirds lens in 2016, the 300mm f4 IS Pro, and released firmware updates for utilizing lens-based IS with the in-body IS through what it called Sync IS. Unfortunately, Sync IS and Dual IS systems were separate, and you couldn't mix and match bodies and lenses across brands. One of the unique selling points for action photographers, Olympus's ProCapture mode, is also limited to Olympus's lenses, specifically their higher quality Pro lenses. With the right body and the right Olympus lens, ProCapture allows you to constantly buffer exposures and stream them to disk once you press the shutter button, meaning that you no longer need to guess or predict when the decisive moment will occur, or end up with lots of shots that you need to end up deleting or taking up disk space. Panasonic has its 4K burst shooting, which is similar in idea and works regardless of lens, but as the name suggests, you're going to give up quite a bit of resolution, as well as the flexibility of a RAW file. The GH5 introduced an 18 megapixel 6K burst, which still gives up on RAW, but worse, uses an awkward 2:1 image ratio. There are other aspects about the lenses, differences in IR tolerances, zoom rotation direction, and on-lens controls that don't work across brands. But the remaining major blocker for an Olympus user to switch to Panasonic, the elephant in the room, autofocus performance. Early on, both Olympus and Panasonic used contrast-based autofocus. With the release of the initial OMD EM1, Olympus added phase detect autofocus, principally to better support lenses from the legacy 4/3 system, but also to improve tracking focus. Over successive generations of the EM1, the phase detect autofocus has demonstrably provided for quicker focusing. Panasonic has continued down a different path, with which it's continued into its full-frame L-mount cameras. They've been optimizing their bodies for contrast-based autofocusing. In order to perform optimally, it has to have information built into the cameras, and it's only available for first-party lenses. Panasonic's depth from defocus system is a glorified contrast detect process which relies on the cameras to have intrinsic knowledge of the lens on the camera to perform optimally. And of course, that information is only provided for first-party lenses. It's an expensive proposition to switch camera systems, often involving replacing a number of lenses. The inherent cost and refamiliarization can be frustrating. One mitigation step is to use adapters to leverage lenses you have from your old system. And in previous comments, I know a lot of you make use of this on your Micro Four Thirds systems already. The truth is, though, that adapters are always suboptimal, be it performance differences or ergonomics. Switching between Olympus and Panasonic in Micro Four Thirds, despite nominally being the same system, it presents drawbacks akin to using an adapter if you've invested in high-end kit. Reduced stabilization, reduced autofocus performance, missing features, and non-functional controls. I try not to deal in rumors on this channel, but between all of that, the scuttlebutt that Panasonic doesn't expect Olympus users to defect, it's entirely understandable. Now, I know a few viewers already shoot both Olympus and Panasonic. I'm keen on your opinions in the comments. Do you work through the incompatibilities or use certain lenses only paired with certain bodies, or have you just not run into those issues? If you currently shoot Olympus and if only Panasonic continues with traditional still cameras for Micro Four Thirds, are you planning on switching? At the moment, L-mount seems much more tightly aligned, but this may also be because it's early days for the system. If you're buying into L-mount now, how concerned are you about fragmentation in the future? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, cheers.